Presenting Tracy Micciche, Senior Director, and Denise Nichols, Associate Principal with the Hackett Group's People and HR Transformation Practice. With experience spanning over 20 years, Tracy has worked with Fortune 500 and 100 clients, helping them solve some of the most complex global HR and payroll problems. Tracy has led numerous global projects that were multifunctional with a large global employee spread. In her current role, Denise helps global clients evaluate, set, and implement HR and payroll transformation strategies, including talent management, service delivery, organizational design, change management, and technology solutions. With over 20 years' experience, Denise has led several complex HCM transformation projects, including multiple processes in the HR and payroll domain. Please welcome Tracy Micciche and Denise Nichols to present on the topic, The Next Generation of Shared Services.
Thanks for joining today. We really appreciate your time. We wanted to cover today what we see as some of the new and emerging trends from an HR shared services standpoint. So to get started, we wanted to give you some background in terms of our key findings. Okay. So as I said, the Hackett Group has done a lot of implementations. We also have done a lot of research on this particular subject. And what we wanted to cover with you today is really what is the trends in regards to shared services as well as global business services that have been primarily focused on co-locating transactional teams in lower cost locations, really to gain the labor arbitrage and get higher levels of efficiency. So some of the trends that we'll talk about today is where organizations are shifting toward a more geographically blended, virtual model. And as you all can imagine, with COVID, this is becoming more and more of a hot topic. So as the shared services teams and global business service teams are emerging, they are taking on more strategic work. They're also requiring more experienced resources, which would include more nuanced language skills, and really, trying to get more country-specific knowledge, that you may not be able to always find in typical hub locations. In addition, the emphasis is really going to be on more in terms of the employee experience and driving more of the self-service through tier 0. In many cases, the goal would be to get 60% or more of the questions and inquiries managed by employees through tier 0. Again, cost is still a priority, but by going to more of a virtual model, it gives you the ability to have the low cost as well as more of a better experience that is enabled by technology. And some of the tools that are being deployed include case management, collaboration tools, et cetera, which also enable you the ability to have teams that do not have to be co-located in order to provide a meaningful employee experience. So what we're going to talk about is really what's happening in this space, why is it happening, and what's the benefit of it.
I would also like to emphasize too, I think COVID has sort of given us an opportunity to actually turn this kind of model upside down and really challenge some of the older views of the way that we've done things in the past. So although there's been a very, very tough year, I think there's some bright spots and being able to do things a little bit differently than we have before because we've proven that we can do it. So one of the things that we've been talking about, internally, especially with a lot of our clients, everyone's working virtual now. So why do we need to actually be in the same spot? There's, whenever we've moved people into a GBS organization, there's like in maybe 5 years where the labor costs are really low, but then others start to move in and they start to find out that, hey, this is kind of this is a place to actually put my shared services. So you've got other companies coming in behind you, stealing some of your employees for like 50 cents more an hour. So then the costs start to go up, and then it's not as much as you're not getting as much return on your investment as you did before. And then you have to kind of start thinking about, where am I going to move my next location? And so this is constantly a battle where you're kind of it's kind of a whack-a-mole situation where you're going from one to another. And it's expensive to set up a GBS organization, finding the place, building out the space, buying the desks, and all of those other things. And if it only has a limited, time frame, then it makes it very difficult. And oftentimes you can't always find the talent that you need. So you have to actually train them all. It makes it very difficult because there's an investment that you have to do. And then if they don't stick around, if they jump to the other, another employer, then you've just wasted all that time and money and effort. So I think having the ability to actually do the virtual GBS, you can find talent where they reside. So they're not having to look, at a particular area. So you can still find them in low cost areas, but you can chase the talent where they live. They can still go into an office, but it doesn't have to be a GBS office. It could be some other office. The key though is about the reporting lines and the governance structure that you put in place. That's what's most important from a GBS perspective. It's not actually where they currently live.
Absolutely. And I think the trend is that, you're not going to be constrained by physical locations or by borders. And so we're going to get into some of the different models that, exist in the marketplace that have been traditional in this manner. So we'll kind of talk about, what was, the centralized model versus the decentralized model, and then, more of a virtual hybrid model as we move forward. So this is probably something that most of you are familiar with. The historical operating model started with more of a decentralized structure that gave you the flexibility and ability to tailor, and it allowed the local language and knowledge culture components of it, but there were really no economies of scale, and it didn't really leverage skills across all the businesses, and it was much more complicated to manage in a decentralized environment because a lot of the technology was lacking. In a centralized, many started moving then toward the centralized structure, which gave you the economies of scale. You did get the one-time labor arbitrage. It did allow, critical mass for, specialization skills, and also getting more physical proximity to the actual shared services resources was a benefit. Some of the cons of that is that, sometimes the execution can disconnect it from the strategy. Languages become more and more complex as you grow as an organization. And in some cases, when you centralize it, you actually lose the talent that understood how things worked, and you have more of a learning curve. And then, more cultural differences become, more apparent, and the investment is much higher. And especially now with, COVID going on, the upfront investment isn't really paying out because in many cases they're having to do multiple shifts in order to keep people, the 6 feet separation, because most of the shared services centers were not designed in that way. When you move toward more of a next generation operating model, organizations are looking at it, from a virtual end state, but also from a hybrid standpoint. So that virtual alignment allows you to be based on the geography. You can leverage the skills and the technologies. You're not limited from a talent standpoint in terms of who you can recruit because the world is your oyster. And then there's really better sharing of, information and resources. And you're really more enabled by technology. And it's really kind of a shift of command and control from a shared services standpoint versus HR as a service standpoint. Some of the, for lack of better terms, we're using the term calm, but really it's just making sure that you're more deliberate about designing your processes, so that you have rigorous attention to detail on that, so that you don't have, any disjointed service delivery in the process of making this transition. And it does require mindset and behavior shifts, because if someone's used to going to someone or an individual or calling, and it allows you to, consolidate the work instead of centralize the work. And it really does change the way that you want to look at things from a performance and talent management standpoint, and how you go about, establishing processes. And it does require greater investment in technology, but if you don't have the, physical locations, and many do today, it's more of saying, do we really need to have some of these site locations? We could invest in the technology, and in many cases actually have more productive, more efficient employees, and a more effective employee experience for the rest of the organization.
I totally agree. And then I think about some of the global mobility. So oftentimes, whenever you set up a new office, you'd expat a few people to go get the office set up and spend a lot of money. Those are, expats cost 3 times more than their annual salary. They're usually highly compensated employees, and with the tax uplifts and everything else. it becomes very, very expensive. And now with a virtual GBS, you wouldn't have that. In addition, I think with the millennials kind of coming in and they're wanting to work in, remote exotic locations, I mean, who wouldn't really? Having the flexibility to be able to do that. And even I've seen some of the visas changing because of the people wanting to work for a month or so and explore a different area. So some countries have actually changed some of their visa programs. Hopefully more will in the future to allow us to do a little bit more travel. The other thing too, I think from a payroll perspective, we've always struggled with trying to find the right language, the understanding the payroll process in those particular areas. So this gives us a lot more flexibility, especially if we need somebody, that speaks French or knows French payroll. We can actually have somebody in France, but still reporting into the GBS organization.
Absolutely. And it's really also a mind shift from away from a call center mentality to really, how you're going to deliver services to the organization.
And I think as we start to look at this more from a talent perspective, rather than, like you say, the call center, it also kind of takes some of the stigma away of working in a GBS organization. I'm not just the workhorse behind all of the other things. That actually kind of elevates the position. I think some of the things too is one of the biggest challenges, I think, though, is getting people to think differently. We've struggled with this with some of our clients, but actually thinking that, knowing that this can actually work. COVID has helped with this. I mean, I can tell you, like, people have said payroll, HR services, it can't be delivered virtually. Well, we've proven that that's wrong. We can actually do that. So, but you still have to have the right setup. We internally, we use a lot of Teams, we use a lot of chats, video conferencing and things like that. So that when, instead of being co-located, looking over someone's shoulder, what we have is, we have people sitting, on team spaces, showing their screens, being able to do some of the work together. Right. So it's just changing the way that you think and feel about this type of work. Now, you still have to have, some folks are caught off guard. So you still have to have the right kind of technology, the VPNs, laptops. I think that was another thing that we struggled with when we made the shift to working from home. Also too, working with some of the vendors. So some of my clients have struggled a bit with some things still being mailed. So trying to get everyone to move to more of a virtual mix can be a little bit of a challenge. And then getting used to using the technology and not just, walking down the hall or peering over someone's cube. Just, it's a different mindset. So it takes a little bit of adjusting. But I really think the advantages outweigh the challenges with the ability to have more flexibility and agility. People are able to live where they want to live. Maybe they want to live out in the country and not in the city. So that can also have a positive effect from an employee engagement perspective.
Absolutely. And what we wanted to do is kind of also talk through a couple of client examples, because, everyone's talking about this in different capacities. In some cases, someone may not have a shared services organization, which I know sounds, rare, but it has happened. And others that are really trying to maximize it. So for one of our clients that has over 100,000 employees, they're an OEM in the automotive industry, and they currently had some of their shared services in low-cost locations for finance and IT. And HR really didn't have a true shared services support model. So they were looking at, should we just expand putting HR in there? Some of their current shared services centers were at capacity. And they were really looking to say, maybe we don't necessarily align with, some of the locations as they exist today, and we're not going to invest any further. We do want to explore virtual and really more from a 60-40 environment, a hybrid model, where they were looking at it from a regional model standpoint as well as from a local, versus, letting everyone go and rehiring resources in a low-cost country. So they view that to be a big advantage for the business as well, and really not lose sight as they started to implement more technology. Then they weren't in this, moving people around, letting people go. They were trying to have a bigger picture in mind as they made the transition.
Denise, what were some of the challenges that you encountered as you were trying to work through, get this approved?
I think the biggest challenge that we had was that many people had a perspective, whether they worked in other organizations, of a traditional shared services model. So there was the connotation that you do need to have centralized resources in a low-cost country. And there was also the connotation of, oh, our people want to have a career path and they don't want to be in a call center. And so we were able to dispel that, and it actually shows a greater career path. We were able to demonstrate, how we would actually be able to manage in a remote environment through enabling technology, through service management, through the HCM system, through RPA. And, we put the case forward, and we also included the business leaders in that to understand that they actually preferred not having resources pulled out of the facilities to assist, but we're also embracing, that we could get more efficient by consolidating work and getting more clear in terms of roles and responsibilities.
How long did it take you to actually get from, the concept to actually getting approval?
I would say it took approximately 6 months. And, and in some cases, we also have, change management activities for those that, it wasn't 100% buy-in, but what we're doing is kind of proving the model as we go. We're putting in strong measurement. We're interacting with the business on a regular basis, and we're not trying to boil the ocean. We're kind of walking before we run with specific processes, gaining success, and then moving forward as we go. We're also not trying to do the big bang across the globe. We're starting in one region. We've developed the so-called playbook for that. We're learning from what we're doing there, and then we're rolling it out to the rest of the globe.
Excellent. So how is the pharmaceutical manufacturing organization different?
So where they're different is they also didn't really have true shared services, but they were redefining their entire operating model. And for them, it was really, taking a step back. They were, implementing success factors at the same time. They were looking at, all of this technology, and they weren't really sure, from the standpoint, they didn't have the scale that the previous client I mentioned. And they were really trying to understand how we can add value more to the business, because everybody was doing everything. And there was also a connotation within the organization of, a negative perception of shared services. So what was different for them is that they were really trying to change the image of HR in the organization. They were trying to take on more strategic work within HR, and they wanted to get more free up those resources to spend more time with the business, focusing on change management, the enterprise initiatives and the talent that was needed to drive, the core business to be more successful, more profitable.
What kind of recommendations would you have for anyone that's thinking about embarking on this journey? Like some hints as to how to get started?
I would say get the business buy-in at the front end, state your business case, but also talk about how things are done today versus how they'll be done in the future, as well as the benefit of doing that. Get their support along the way in terms of, the processes. So make it about, efficiency in terms of cost. Make it about effectiveness, that they're going to get better service. They're not going to be losing anything. And then really making it more about the employee experience and driving more accountability with the employees and the managers from the standpoint of giving them more access to things so they don't have to go to HR, that we are more nimble in terms of providing them the answers they need in a much quicker, more streamlined manner. And in all cases, the business was skeptical, but we're proving that out. And we've actually invited them to a lot of the sessions so they could see the technology and they could see the art of the possible. So they weren't getting it secondhand as well.
So as they started to do the implementation, what do you think the biggest challenges were?
I think determining what you should do first, second, third was the biggest challenge. In addition, which region you want to start with, that you're going to have the most buy-in and the greatest success, so that then you can take that success and, extrapolate it through the rest of the organization. And I think that's the key, is really, getting where you think you're going to have the greatest success, starting there and getting some wins under your belt before you try to do everything at once.
Do you have any advice on how to handle, groups or subgroups that have to do something in order to enable this product, this vision? like say maybe IT, and how to get them on board as well?
So what we did was we included them as part of the overall team, and we, essentially said, this is the enabling, technology is going to be critical. Here's what the advantages were, and we involved the IT organization on the front end in terms of the ROI and the business case, and that they were committed in terms of the resources that they were going to be supplying to, support this effort.
Was it difficult to make a financial business case in order to get this approved for funding? Because obviously you had to set up a lot of IT infrastructure.
No, the overall business case, when we looked at it, there was a cost savings, in less than 3 years across the board. And in some cases, depending on if it was, time and attendance processes or HCM, we really broke down the business case by, the technology and the initiative that we were trying to accomplish and the processes that we were rolling out. So there was definitely a return on investment, including the, making the investment in the technology. There was definitely, reductions that we were able to make, reallocation of resources, and again, driving a more streamlined experience instead of having, a lot of manual intervention or people intervention as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Denise, for sharing that. I think it's very helpful to have real life examples, not just theoretical discussions.
Absolutely.
So some of the things too that we always like to emphasize, regardless of whatever you're doing, like the standardizing of processes, like whenever you centralize anything, it becomes more difficult to manage it decentralized. Every time you have a different process, every time you have a different variation, that's going to cost your company more money. So people think moving, changing, outsourcing, or changing technologies where you save the money. That's actually not it. It's where it's actually standardizing the processes, because that's where you get the economies of scale. You get the ROI from being able to automate. It takes less intervention, less manual work. And it's also one of the most difficult and also sometimes emotional parts of the project, because people just get tied to they like their variations, they like their exceptions, they like to be treated special. Unfortunately, it doesn't create agility, nor does it create the economies of scale. So you're not ever going to be able to automate it. Then looking at strategically aligning your HR services. So what we mean by that is really making sure that whatever you set up is not only going to work for today, but also going to work for the future. So if your company's on an M&A track, you want to be able to make sure that whatever infrastructure that you set up today is going to be able to absorb that. Maybe you're going to be doing some global expansion, so you're going to be going into new countries. You want to make sure that whatever you do can actually support that. Because at the end of the day, you are going to be, your customer is your business. So making sure that you're set up for success. The third thing, and often neglected, is the governance process. Making sure you have strong governance, because especially if you're going to be using resources that are currently already maybe aligned to a business unit, that now moving them to the global shared services, that might be a little bit of a change management challenge. So making sure that you have strong governance in place, making sure everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing, what their span of control is. Oftentimes too, we see when we have major transformation, clients struggle with like who's supposed to be doing what, because it wasn't clearly defined in the new structure. And so that causes a lot of delays and infighting. So it's best to set that up at the beginning. You can always make modifications and changes as you go forward if something is either too bureaucratic or there aren't enough controls. So you can go either way. Align your virtual organization to your global footprint. What we mean by that is you want to have people in the same time zone, maybe not the exact same time zone, but in similar time zones, so that they're able to actually interact with the people that are going to be asking the questions. They're, from a payroll perspective, you want to make sure that they're available during banking hours, so that if they have to do an off cycle or manual payment, that they're there. And because if everyone, I've seen only a couple of clients try to actually centralize it all in one global place. It becomes very tricky unless you're going to be running, round the clock shared services. But I also think from a cultural perspective, if you're from the region, you kind of understand kind of the norms, and it's a little bit easier for the business to accept.
Great. And then I know we only have a few minutes, so kind of in, summary, we're really looking at, how you build the foundation is very important, the structure and the governance, the service design, what technology you're going to be leveraging, and then really having the collaboration, training and tools to connect the organization. Maybe you have, if you have, a virtual GBS, maybe you are scheduling more, in-person meetings, on, a quarterly basis versus what maybe in the past have been on an annual basis. So it's really how you connect those employees and make sure that they feel part of the organization. But all of these are comprehensive things, to consider. And we want to open the floor for a few minutes for questions so that, if you have any questions or comments. And also, Tracy, I believe you're going to be available later today, to, take questions from anyone that's participating today.
Absolutely.
Oh, just a second. I do have one question. What do you think are the barriers to centralizing HR delivery? So from the standpoint of centralizing HR delivery, again, it's more limiting the resources and the talent that you have. I don't think it's how you manage it. But again, if you're in a particular location or in a particular global hub, you're going to be competing for talent, whereas you also, in many cases end up having to go and get the talent versus taking advantage of the talent that's in-house. Tracy, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, I think you covered it, Denise.
And then our next question is, what are the primary advantages of a shared services model for offering HR support? So essentially what it is it's allowing you to streamline and standardize your processes to drive more efficiencies. You can drive cost out of the model, and you can drive a better employee experience. So those would be, the key advantages. And how these apply to small and medium-sized businesses varies, right? Because if you have more scale, but the concept of virtual actually enables that further, because you don't have to be limited by scale any longer, because you could truly consolidate the work regardless of the location with fewer people instead of everyone touching everything. So that's where I would say, from a small and medium-sized business, where you're going to get your biggest bang for your buck. Tracy, do you want to expand on any of that?
I would also say visibility. So right now, if everything's done locally, you don't have any visibility.
Exactly. Thank you for your time, and hope you enjoy the rest of the sessions.
Thank you.
Thank you.